My name is Jerm. This is Germ Warfare, the battle of ideas.
Ooh, Kozar, thank you for joining me in the trenches again.
Always a pleasure, Jerm.
So I was thinking, Carl, when you and I traveled across China, I learned so much about China from you. You're like a wealth of knowledge, the great library of Alexandria, excepting you weren't destroyed. And
thank you.
and I thought it might be appropriate.
I almost got destroyed. Like YouTube took my channel offline for like 24 hours for no reason.
Why?
Well, I don't know why, because they rejected my appeal, and then I posted on X talking about it, and because I have like 200,000 followers on X, so I got a lot of retweets. And then Team YouTube on Twitter contacted me and say, okay, we'll look into it. And then I finally was able to, get a human to look into my problem. And then they come up with some really bogus excuse. But anyway, they restore my channel, but they say because my channel was hacked last year and the hacker uploaded a whole bunch of like crypto scam videos. I was pretty sure I removed all the crypto scam videos last year, after I regained the channel. But YouTube claimed there was one channel there was one video was left on my channel which violated their policy on scamming, and so that's why they blocked my channel. They did not give me any notification beforehand. They just like, your channel has been terminated because you violated our harmful content policy. I'm like, what the heck? So I suspect is, YouTube was gonna can me, and then because of public uproar on X, so they wanted like a plausible deniability. So they resuscitated one of the deleted scam video on my channel and say, oh, that video violated our policy, so it was a mistake. But they still give me a community guideline warning, even though they find out that was a hacker's video. So I had to go through do the YouTube community guideline training to get that warning take off in 3 months. It's BS, man. It's a bunch of BS.
But you know what is really funny is that the Chinese are terrible at scamming. It should be a Nigerian.
Well, actually, no. You because you don't know this, because the Chinese scam other Chinese. They don't target you, so you don't know. Because I was getting calls, like in Indonesia, in my home, on my phone, and say, oh, you have in Chinese, they speak in Chinese. Oh, you have a special package waiting for you at the Chinese embassy. I'm like, why would I have a special package waiting for me in Chinese embassy? I'm not even a Chinese citizen. And so I suspect my phone number somehow got leaked via WeChat. There might be a WeChat hack. And so the people, they know I'm Chinese, but they just don't know I'm actually not a citizen. So they use like very bogus reason, like, oh, you have a package waiting for you at Chinese embassy. I'm like, why would I have a package waiting for me Chinese embassy? But it's a serious problem, actually. It's a serious problem. So a lot of Chinese nationals, they have been scammed by, by supposedly job opportunities to head over to places like Thailand and Cambodia, and then they get kidnapped. And then they get sent straight into the scam centers where they work for the scammers to send like telescam calls, So one of the guy that was talking to me was probably a guy was being held hostage in Cambodia somewhere, who has to fulfill his daily quota of scams. So he, like they keep him alive. It's pretty bad. China has cracked down several times by working with, Cambodian and Thai authority. Like anytime Thailand or Cambodia, they want to gain favor of the Chinese government, then they start to crack down all those scammers and send them back to China. Yeah, it's pretty bad, actually.
I always thought the world's best scammers are the Nigerians, but now you're giving them a run for the money.
Yeah, you just don't know, because the Chinese scammer, the target Chinese, right? Like, like there's a joke on Chinese internet. It's like the Chinese people don't cheat Chinese. But it's a joke because like everybody knows those Chinese scammers target specifically Chinese. So yeah.
Anyway, what I was saying before we got sidetracked there is that traveling across China with you was a complete pleasure. I learned so much from you. You're a wealth of information about China, and I thought it would be appropriate to have a conversation with you about gardening. No, I'm kidding.
Yes. My favorite topic.
No,
I let my wife do it.
I was having a chat a few days ago with somebody, and he mentioned, just in passing, that China has an expansionist agenda. And I thought, hold on, wait a minute. That doesn't quite sound correct.
I think very simple. People have to know that at the time of the Opium War, when British waged a war to sell drugs to China, that at the time of Opium War in 1841, then the Chinese territory then was bigger than the Chinese territory now. So I think that sets the context. That wasn't that long ago. 1841 was only 160 years ago, right? So China's 160 years ago was much bigger than China today. If you, but the thing is, China has been an empire for thousands of years, right? I mean, its boundary expand and contract. When China is powerful, it expands out. When China weakened, it contracts. But more or less, it all happened in the same geographic area, right? This is part of it's because geography. There's a whole Himalayan mountains. They're not going to expand to the south of that, and then there's a Gobi Desert, and all the steppe land of Central Asia. But the Chinese territory has changed widely over the years. But people have to keep in mind, at the time of the Opium War, China used to be a lot bigger, right? I think a lot of the talking point about China being expansionist, people will raise the typical issues of Xinjiang and Tibet, right? They will say, "Oh, what about Xinjiang and Tibet?" Well,
and Taiwan.
Tibet, yeah, and Taiwan. Okay, so at the time of Opium War, all these territory all was part of the Qing Empire. I mean, people can go back to the maps of 1840 or 1820. Those were all Chinese territory. Well, they were acquired at different times, for sure. But what happened was with these territories. So Taiwan, I'll go one case by case, right? Taiwan, what happened was in 1894, 1895, China lost a war against Japan in the First Sino-Japanese War. As a result, Japan forced China to give the island of Taiwan to the Empire of Japan. But that was reversed after World War II. So at the end of 1945, Japan was forced to give up all the territory it had conquered prior, including Taiwan. So Taiwan was returned back to China in 1945. The situation with Taiwan today is really a result of unfinished business of Chinese Civil War, because the Chinese government that was ruling China at the end of World War II, which accepted Taiwan, the nationalist government under Chiang Kai-shek was defeated in the Chinese Civil War by the communists. So they fled to Taiwan, right? So that is the reason for the division. But this is why the official name of the government on Taiwan, they call themselves Republic of China, right? So it's a competing vision of China. I mean, they don't say, Taiwan not part of China, but
just go
ahead.
But sorry, before you go any further, right now, the year 2026, how does the government of China see Taiwan?
It sees Taiwan as a breakaway province. It sees as a renegade province. I mean, that's all if you look at the official Chinese communique, it says the renegade province of Taiwan. And in fact, that's how China saw in its dealing with the United States. Most famously in 1972, when Nixon went over to China, he met with the Chinese premier Zhou Enlai, and they signed the joint the Shanghai Communique, and in which United States recognized that there's only one China with so legitimate government based in Beijing. And the Taiwan issue is to be resolved by the Chinese people on both sides of the Taiwan Strait. That is what's written in the joint Shanghai communique, which is hosted today. You can find it on the United States government site, on the State Department. You can look it up. So that is forming the basis of the current China-U.S. relationship, actually. It's called the One China principle. So for China, for the Chinese official position, you always hold that Taiwan is a breakaway province, but we hope for peaceful reunification. But we're not taking off, we don't want to take off anything off the table, including force, but we hope for peaceful reunification. If you listen to Xi Jinping's talk on Taiwan, he always says the same thing. We want to push for peaceful reunification with Taiwan. So that's the official Chinese line.
Is it in the interests of either or both Taiwan and the mainland to use force?
Well, no. I mean, that's why China, that's why right now there's a lot of people on Twitter say, oh, this is a perfect opportunity for China to reunify with Taiwan, right? While United States is distracted in West Asia against Iran. But China has not made any move, because the last thing China wants to do is to use force, because, China's goal is to reincorporate Taiwan, including its people and the society of Taiwan. China does not want to destroy Taiwan. The last thing you want to do is use force, and now you're faced with an embittered population, right? And then which leaves the problem down the road. So China rather wait for when the opportunity is right for Taiwan to fall into its lap, and I think that's going to happen. I mean, as for people, maybe people say, what's the benefit of reunification? Well, let's say right now, when U.S. waging a war in West Asia, that's caused the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Taiwan is very energy dependent on the oil and gas coming from the Gulf. And, because before U.S. waivers the sanction against Russian and Iranian oil, Taiwan got almost all its energy from the Gulf. So it has nowhere to turn. Whereas China, they can just buy more from Russia, which is next door. And they never had problem buying Iranian oil. In fact, Iran is right now selling more oil to China than they had been before the war. So if China and Taiwan are one, Taiwan would not be in an energy crisis right now. Go ahead.
Sorry, man, I thought you finished there. So the converse question is, how does Taiwan see the mainland?
That's a little bit more complicated question. So before 2000, majority of Taiwanese, if you ask them, they will identify as both Taiwanese and Chinese. That was like not even a question. But what changed since 2000 was a new party came to power. This is the Democratic Progressive Party, DPP, short for DPP, came to Taiwan, and their party platform, in Taiwan independence was written into their party platform. So what they did is they carry out what's so-called de-Sinification campaign. So what they do is education. First, they start with education. They remove like all the any content mentioned about China from the Taiwan textbooks. So before 2000, like students in Taiwan, they would learn about Chinese history, they would learn about Chinese geography. But when the DPP government took over, they're like, no, you don't need to learn that. You don't need to learn about China, Chinese history, Chinese geography. That's China. China is China. Taiwan is Taiwan. So they try to artificially create like a Taiwan identity that's separate from the Chinese identity, which, before the 2000 generation, people on Taiwan didn't see a contradiction. They're both Taiwanese and Chinese, of course. But after 2000, because of this, you can call it brainwashing, you can call it whatever. This is definitely a government-led top-down campaign to foster a new consciousness, a new ethnogenesis on Taiwan. And it worked. It actually worked, because now, 20 years later, 26 years later, half century later, if you ask a lot of young Taiwan people, they tend to identify more exclusively as Taiwanese rather than say or Chinese. Now, I think that actually that shows the process can probably also be reversed. But anyway, so the thing is, I have friends in Taiwan. I talk to them all the time, and one thing they always tell me is it's like the cultural DNA of Taiwan is still very much Chinese. This is why people in Taiwan, they still when they turn on TV, they still watch like Chinese TV dramas made in mainland. Because that's the majority of the cultural production now. Taiwan used to be like a cultural, used to have a lot of cultural soft power. Because back in 1980s, when I was growing up in mainland China, we watched TV dramas and movies made in Hong Kong and made in Taiwan. Because those guys were cool back then. Those guys are rich, they're wealthy, they have everything that we didn't. And so people kind of looked up to Taiwan and Hong Kong. Oh, by the way, in 1980s, at that time, the GDP of Hong Kong is equivalent to a quarter of the entire Chinese mainland GDP. Today it's like a small fraction, right? That's just because how much China has grown. But so before, Taiwan had a lot of soft power. They exported soft, culture to mainland China. Like my older cousin, they all know how to sing Taiwanese songs, from 80s and 90s. And they will be able to name all the pop stars in Taiwan. But after 2000, decades of Chinese growth, and particularly today in 2026, a lot of the Chinese language cultural production now is concentrated on Chinese mainland. Even a lot of the Taiwanese pop singers, Taiwanese entertainers, also Hong Kong as well, movie producers, they all go to mainland China because that's where money is. That's where the huge market. That's where the market is. So this is why today, a lot of young people in Taiwan, they still tune over to mainland China for to get their Chinese cultural fix. But go ahead.
You mentioned Hong Kong. There's also one that we didn't really talk about because that was how did you describe it? It was reunited back into the mainland. Now, I remember when you and I were there, and I was chatting to a few people, and they were unhappy about this process. They say that Hong Kong is now going down.
Yeah, I would not deny it. There's a significant fraction of people in Hong Kong. They feel they're not happy with the handover that happened in 1997. This is why there was a widespread Hong Kong protest in 2019. After which many Hong Kongers has immigrated to particularly to UK. Because UK gave them the so-called the BNO, like the British Overseas National Passport, which allowed them to immigrate to UK, which doesn't give them full citizenship, but it's kind of like, I don't know, like second class.
Well, the one
guy,
go ahead.
The
one guy, we won't mention names, but we'll just call him Vanilla Ice. No. He is one of those gentlemen that went from Hong Kong to the UK.
Yeah. I mean, it's very common. But I think a lot of people will have to learn, like maybe the hard way. Maybe the UK is not what they picture it to be. Especially for people who have a comfortable middle class lifestyle in Hong Kong, who are making decent money.
You're missing my question though. Hong Kong does seem dirty. I mean, Shanghai is very clean. And many people argue that Hong Kong was very clean once upon a time.
that's a good question because the time I went to Hong Kong with you, that was the first time. Oh no, that was the second time I went to Hong Kong. The other time I was in Hong Kong was 2019 during the protest. So I wouldn't be able to tell you from a personal experience what Hong Kong was like, but my experience 2019 and the time we went, what was it, the 20 like a couple of years ago, 2023 maybe?
24, I think.
Yeah, 24. It's the same. I mean, like I didn't see much difference in 2019 and 2024.
Hang on. To be fair,
go ahead.
To be fair, I mean, I don't know if you've been to Paris, but Paris is filthy. So it depends on what your benchmark is. I've never seen as much graffiti as I've seen in Paris. That's it. That's the top of the list for me. It is filthy.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, Shanghai has always been, well, it has been clean at least for a while now, for like at least decades. Because I remember going to China in 2001. This is like October 2001, right after 9/11. And George Bush also went to China for an APEC meeting. And I was surprised because I just landed in Shanghai from Hamburg, Germany. I worked in Germany for like 6 months working on a project for Axel Springer. So when I landed in Shanghai, I was like, wow, Shanghai was much cleaner than Hamburg. Because in Hamburg, there's like dog poop everywhere. Like people bring their dogs in restaurant and poop on the floor. And Shanghai, I didn't see that. But it could be in around 2001, maybe they cleaned up for the George W. Bush visit. It is possible. But that was my impression in 2001 was Shanghai was cleaner than Hamburg, Germany. Because Hamburg was not that clean. But go ahead.
No, well, I think the underlying question then was the reunification of Hong Kong to the mainland success?
Well, I think it depends on who to ask, right? For the people who are not happy, who left, for them, obviously, they don't think it's a success. They feel like Hong Kong is going down. That's why they immigrated to UK. But for the people who remain in Hong Kong, I mean, obviously, they made their... people vote with their feet, right? The people who didn't like Hong Kong, they left. People who remain, I think that's a success. For them, it's a success. But I think there are obviously problems because if you weren't problems, there wouldn't be the widespread protests in 2019. Now, I have to remind people is that Hong Kong is not being ruled the same way as mainland China. Because even after 1997, when Hong Kong sovereignty was handed over to China by Britain, Hong Kong was governed under so-called one country, two systems, which means they will keep doing the same way they were doing things under the British. This was the promise that was promised by Deng Xiaoping. He said, "We'll keep the two sides separate for 50 years. Then we'll see what happens."
Which hasn't happened yet.
So, which hasn't happened right now for a Chinese national on mainland China for them to go to Hong Kong. They still need a passport. They still need to go through immigration, and so there is literally a physical barrier. So it's not just a Chinese city. So Hong Kong is still governed in a very, people describe Hong Kong was like the free market capitalism. Many libertarians rate Hong Kong as more freer economy than United States. In a way, this is why a lot of and it's also a financial capital. It functions as kind of financial capital interface between the West and China. A lot of Chinese companies that go to Hong Kong stock market to list in order to raise capital. And again, for the Westerners, because Hong Kong offer a degree of familiarity because there's higher English level language level in Hong Kong. But for you, it's just China. You know, I know you told me. I was telling you Hong Kong is the most westernized Chinese city. You're just like, it's just China to me. Then we went to Shanghai. Okay, there is a difference between Shanghai and Hong Kong. I think Hong Kong is a little bit more westernized than Shanghai.
It's a massive difference.
And Shanghai is more westernized than the other Chinese cities. There are levels. There are levels.
Yeah. But I mean, Shanghai for me is superior to Hong Kong. But that was just my personal experience.
Yeah.
But now, okay, so that protest you referred to in 2019, you haven't mentioned that it had foreign-backed interests.
You have Ukrainian neo-Nazis like the Azov battalions showing up in Hong Kong. And they were actually the NED, National Endowment for Democracy, which is like the CIA front group in the United States. They actually
And it's got funding from Falun Gong.
Falun Gong was founded by the same people who found the So anyway, so they the NED sponsor a showing of that Ukraine on Fire documentary, which was made specifically to counter or I think Michael Moore made a documentary on the Ukraine war, right? So the NATO and their sponsor made a counter pro-Ukrainian documentary called Ukraine on Fire, and they did a lot of showing at the protest site in Hong Kong. And I remember there was a very famous BBC interview, one of the Hong Kong protesters who attended the showing of the Ukraine on Fire. And she got very emotional and she was crying. She said like, oh, I wish us in Hong Kong would have the same happy ending as Ukraine. Okay, granted that was 2019, just before the war in 2022, but still, it's like you have no idea what's actually going on in Ukraine. All your information was these like CIA agitprop, like front organization propaganda was a force feeding you, and then you are hoping that you have a happy ending, same like Ukraine. And so in that regard, I think Hong Kong is much better than Ukraine. I think that's obvious. For 2026, Hong Kong is doing much better than Ukraine. So I mean, like there were problems in Hong Kong, but I think that those problems this is how color revolution come about. You know, like color revolution, they didn't create everything out of thin air. They capitalized and they leveraged existing grievances. So there were grievances in Hong Kong, but I think they got co-opted because Hong Kong. People have to remember Hong Kong was the front line of Cold War. You know, that place was crawling with all the intelligence services type, you know, from MI6, CIA, you name it. All the three-letter agencies were in Hong Kong during the Cold War. They didn't leave. They did not leave after the end of Cold War. And I think, this in 2019, United States and also UK, they just decided to activate all their assets to kind of to cause a big problem for China, and that was also, I think, not intended to so far to cause a color revolution in Hong Kong. I think that was never possible, but really to have an impact on Taiwan, because Taiwan was having its election around the same time, and the Taiwan ruling party DPP was going to that election kind of on very wobbly ground. They had been already ruling Taiwan for a while. They were not popular, but because of Hong Kong protests, they used the Hong Kong protests as a scaremongering tactic for Taiwan voters. Like, you see what happened? You see what happened if we do the one country, two system like Hong Kong did? You see what happened? You have riots on the streets. You know, you have like the cops' brutality, and so Taiwan DPP leadership managed to win a second round of election that time because of on the back of the Hong Kong protest. So so there's that, and like recently the guy who was bankrolling the Hong Kong protests. This is popular knowledge. The Hong Kong billionaire Jimmy Lai, who was called by Wall Street Journal as the Rupert Murdoch of Asia, he bankrolled Hong Kong protests, and his second guy in command, named Mark Simon, literally come from a CIA family. I mean, like that guy's dad was a CIA officer. I mean, is he part of CIA? You can never, you can never know. This is a plausible deniability. But yeah. So there's a lot of shady stuff going on in Hong Kong, foreign meddling for sure.
But I do wonder though if the Taiwan situation would be more severe. I've got a close friend who left South Africa 20 years ago, and he's now resident of Taiwan, citizen. I don't know. I'm not sure. One of those two. And he's traveled the world. And I asked him a few months ago, I said, so have you been to the mainland? And his answer was no. I said, but it's right there. It's like a 2-hour flight. And he said, yes, but it's China. And, we don't really like China. So I wonder now how deeply entrenched that propaganda is and where it's coming from.
It's pretty, I mean, it has been there for decades. I mean, since 1949, because you have to remember what happened. After Japan returned Taiwan to China in 1947, China soon got embroiled in the Civil War, and two sides fought. The nationalists got defeated, and they left, and they went to Taiwan. And for decades and decades during the Cold War, from 1949 to 1987, Taiwan was under martial law. The martial law was not lifted until 1987. And in Taiwan today, that period is still called the White Terror. It's called White Terror because they were going after all the communists and what they suspect to be the communist sympathizers. So this is how the lot of the problems in Taiwan today actually can date to that period, because for the KMT government, for the nationalist government that came to Taiwan from mainland China, they are different from the people who live there. For centuries, even though the Taiwanese are Chinese, they mostly came from the neighboring province of Fujian, just across the Taiwan Strait. So they speak the same language, Minnan, or some people refer as Hokkien, which is another term for Fujian. But when the KMT government got defeated, they came to Taiwan. They brought millions of people with them. And those people come from all over China. They didn't just from the same province, Fujian, anymore. They're the people from northern China, even people from Mongolia, from Tibet, from like all over China went to Taiwan. And so the KMT government forced Mandarin education. Like they banned local dialect. They ban people to speak their own local language, Hokkien, which is Hokkien, and they mandate everybody must now speak in Mandarin in schools. And like people, the teacher will beat the students if they speak. They heard them speak the local lingua in. So this caused a lot of resistance. So people saw these mainlanders. Who came with the KMT, by the way, came with Chiang Kai-shek. These are not communist mainlanders. There's the anti-communist mainlanders. But the people just see them as mainlanders. There's mainlander carpetbaggers who came to Taiwan taking over everything. In a way they did, because when the Japanese left, when Japan came to Taiwan, they ruled as a colony, right? They seized all the most important assets. So when the Japanese left, well, guess what? The nationalist government under Chiang Kai-shek then came to took over all those confiscated assets from the Japanese. But because they themselves are a little bit different from the local population, there's a lot of resentments. All these mainland carpetbaggers coming here, impose their language, taking our land, and now they're instituting martial law. So this is where Taiwan separatism originally came from. Taiwan separatism originally was against the government of Chiang Kai-shek that came from mainland China. And this is also why there's anti-mainland sentiment, even dating to 1949. But on top of that, you have the KMT government carrying out the relentless brainwashing, like the Red Scare against mainland China. So, like these are communists on the mainland. So throughout 50 years of Cold War, these kind of different strains of propaganda, like the sentiment fused together. Now it just became mainland China is bad. It's a bad communist place where all the bad people come from. And so that remained the situation today. So right now, after the democratization of Taiwan, which happened in late 1990s, the two parties, the Democratic Progressive Party was the opposition party. So they realized the best way for them to become the main party is to divide the votes, because they did the divide and conquer strategy. So on the island, about 85% of the population on the island, their ancestors, their parents, grandparents were already on the island in 1945 when Chiang Kai-shek's government came to take it over from Japan. But 15% of the population came with Chiang Kai-shek when they were defeated on mainland China, came to island. So this presented an opportunity for the people doing the populist politics. Hey, we have this 15% divide. If we keep on pushing this line that we have been oppressed by all these mainland carpetbaggers, right? And then we can at least getting 85% of the vote. And that's what happened. I mean, they appealed to the local, in the Western press, called Taiwanese, but they're really the local Hokkien population who spoke the Fujian language, who came to Taiwan earlier, and then versus the mainlanders who came with Chiang Kai-shek in 1949, and so. This was the origin of the Taiwan separatism. They say, okay, the problem was all brought on by the Chinese mainlanders when the Chiang Kai-shek came over, created all this problem, and now we don't want to have anything with mainland China. So this is kind of very complicated history, but there's a lot of nuance to it.
Geopolitically, though, Taiwan poses also interesting potential problems for the mainland. It's got strong U.S.
Of course.
interests.
General MacArthur of the United States famously said during the Korean War that Taiwan is an unsinkable aircraft carrier off the coast of China. And that's exactly what it is. It's a base to use for United States to contain China. So during the Cold War, they developed the concept called the first island chain, which is this chain that runs from Japan all the way through islands of Okinawa, down to Taiwan, down to Philippines, all surrounding the South China Sea to contain China within the first island chain. And then, this was originally to contain communism, right? China and Soviet Union. But after the Cold War, it was just used to contain China. And this is why Taiwan issue is not really an issue between Taiwan and mainland China. It's really an issue between U.S. and China. During the Cold War, U.S. has stationed up to 60,000 troops on Taiwan, and they actually had nuclear-tipped missiles stationed in Taiwan. People today probably don't even realize that. So, 1972, when Nixon went to China, one of the deal that was made that led to final normalization of ties between China and the United States was for United States to withdraw its military and withdraw its nuclear missiles from Taiwan. This policy was reversed under Trump administration when Trump sent like 500 Marines over to Taiwan. That was the first time after 1970s, when U.S. military touched ground on Taiwan again. So now we're, but thanks for Trump. But Trump has other priorities because he has to taking care of the golden boy Israel. So now he's in West Asia fighting the war for Israel. So now United States is taking all the military hardwares in East Asia and shipping them to West Asia. Like all the Marines are sending over to Iran right now. So we're originally stationed in Okinawa. Again, part of the first island chain to contain China. And if people look at a map in terms of geopolitics, there's a whole island chain from Japan down to Taiwan. You kind of block China's access to the Pacific Ocean, right? And this is how United States constantly talk about its Navy's ability to blockade China, to cut off the Chinese energy supplies, right, including at Sri Malacca. Well, right now we would know what that would look like because now we have a blockade at the Strait of Hormuz, and the U.S. Navy didn't need to block the Strait of Malacca. Strait of Hormuz got blocked, and now we saw the consequences. The consequences is actually the U.S. allies in the region, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Philippines, all suffering right now because they're more heavily dependent on the Middle East oil. China can still get their oil and gas from Russia.
Speaking of Japan, I mean, the Japanese like to claim that China is expansionist, particularly Tibet.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go back to Tibet. So again, like I mentioned, at the time of Opium War, Tibet was already part of the Chinese Empire. Chinese official government. I'll do the official Chinese government line, and I'll give my own personal opinion. So the official Chinese government line says the incorporation of Tibet date to the Yuan dynasty. When Kublai Khan founded the Yuan dynasty in Beijing, but during the time of Mongol conquest, Mongol incorporated Tibet, which technically true, but some people feel, but that was the Mongols. But technically, because Mongol did bring different pieces of China together at that time. But let's just toss away Mongols for a second. Let's say that doesn't count. That's Chinese government propaganda, doesn't count. But by 1720, the Qing government, which is based in Beijing, again, the Qing dynasty government, they did send army to Lhasa because at that time, the Qing government was engaging a fight against the Zhuanggar Mongols for supremacy over Central Asia. And the Zhuanggars, they sent the expeditionary force into Tibet to occupy Lhasa. So that allowed the Qing government to have an excuse. They were invited by the Tibetans to go to Lhasa to expel the invading Zhuanggar Mongols. And then after that, the Qing government stayed and officially incorporated Tibet as part of the Qing Empire. So that's 1720. That's before the founding of the United States. U.S. was 1776, right? So 1720, that's like, 50 years before the founding of the United States, Tibet already became part of China. And it has been part of China ever since. What happened was in 1911, when Chinese Revolution overthrew the last imperial dynasty in China, at that time, all the provinces of the Qing Empire declared independence, including Tibet and Mongolia. But the thing is, nobody recognized Tibet as an independent country. The only one, so what Mongolia and Tibet did then is they recognized each other, as an independent state, but nobody else was recognized in either Mongolia or Tibet at that time. So if you look at the maps, world maps that was published during World War II, for example, you will show Tibet as part of China. So what happened was Tibet was de facto independent, but it never gained recognition. It never gained international recognition. And Chinese government still maintained all that time that Tibet was part of China, but it didn't have control over it because China at that time was during the warlords period when different warlords were fighting each other. And then after that, there was a Japanese invasion, so nobody can be bothered. But during World War II, a portion of the British the Allied aid to China was actually going through Tibet. So they went from British India to Tibet, and from Tibet carry on yaks to the rest of China. So so what happened was after the Chinese Civil War, when the communists won, this is when Dalai Lama's government in Lhasa, they felt threatened because they felt like communism, they're atheists, right? They're going to be a big threat to us, a Buddhist theocracy. So at that time, they tried, at last minute, they tried to gain international recognition. Again, they failed, but they did gain cooperation from the CIA. So CIA had met with Dalai Lama's older brother, so they shipped a bunch of Tibetan guerrillas to train in Colorado. And then, but in 1950, as Chinese Civil War came to an end, the Chinese People's Liberation Army did march on to Tibet, and they defeated the Tibetan army, and this resulted in what's called the 17-point agreement. The 17-point agreement, which is agreement between the Dalai Lama's government in Lhasa and the central government in Beijing, that you agree that Tibet is part of China, but Tibet will gain a autonomous status within China, which means the Dalai Lama's government will get to maintain their way of life. They will keep on ruling as they did before. China will handle the foreign policy and military. So that was agreement. But what happened was in the mid-50s, so China started to carry out a series of land reforms, which has done in the other parts of China, but they promised they will leave Tibet alone. Tibet was original one country, two system place. So they promised to leave Tibet alone. But what happened was when China was carrying out, so people have to realize the Tibetan population in China is actually, don't just live in the Tibet. Like today, the region known as Tibet Autonomous Region matches the area that was under the control of Dalai Lama's government in 1950, right? But the Tibetan Plateau is actually geographically much bigger area. So a lot of Tibetan population, in fact, half of the Tibetan population live outside of the Tibet, in other parts of Tibetan Plateau, in various Chinese provinces. Now, in mid-1950, Chinese government started to implement land reform in other Chinese provinces that has large Tibetan population. The land reform include seizing the land from landlords and doing redistribution. It so happened the Tibetan monasteries, a lot of the Buddhist monasteries, are largest landlords, they're largest landowners. So they got their land taken away and getting distributed to the former serfs. So this became a huge issue for the local Tibetan aristocracy. And this is the start of the Tibetan revolt in the outlying areas. Now this affected the Dalai Lama's government in Lhasa as well, because they saw what was happening. They say, okay, well, Chinese government promised not to touch us, to allow us to keep our way of life, including serfdom, because Tibet was a serf society. 90% of the population were serfs. But they were worried because they saw in the outlying provinces where there's a lot of Tibetan live, they saw the Tibetan monastery got their land confiscated and getting redistributed. So they're worried it's just a matter of time that China will implement the same policy in the Tibetan proper. So they got in touch with the rebels, and they also got in touch with the CIA, who were supplying the rebels. And so the Tibetan rebellion grew larger and larger. From 1955, eventually it reached Lhasa in 1959. So in 1959, there was a plot. At the time, it was very complicated, but how it touched off was Dalai Lama was originally scheduled to go to the PLA garrison in Lhasa to attend some ceremony, some celebration. But now there was a widespread rumor in Lhasa at the time, probably by his senior monks, saying that Chinese are the Chinese government officials are intending to kidnap Dalai Lama during the ceremony. And so what happened, this touched off a big riot in Lhasa. And all the monasteries, they are armed, by the way. Like, I know in the West, Tibet has an image of being Shangri-La, being peaceful, but all the monasteries, they have their own army. This was a traditional way of life in the feudal Tibetan society. The monasteries, they have their own monk armies with weapons, including firearms. So all the monks, they start an uprising in March 1959, and what they did is they sent out Dalai Lama on horseback across the Himalayas to India while they started the rebellion in the city of Lhasa. But very soon, the PLA put down the Tibetan rebellion in Lhasa. This led to the sharp deterioration of ties between China and India, by the way. So China and India before 1959 had a honeymoon period. The Indians call it Hindi Chini Bye Bye, which means China-Indian brothers. We're brothers. But after 1959, because of Tibetan revolt, because Dalai Lama flew to India with CIA assistance, that led Mao to be very suspicious of Indian leadership under Nehru. And the two-side relationship deteriorated very fast. That eventually led to the China-India war in 1962 on the borders. But anyway, so this is whole history of the Tibetan revolt. I mean, I can tell a lot of stories because of my mom. When she was 19 years old, a recent graduate from nursing school, she was sent over to the Tibetan plateau to work on a high altitude clinic that serves the local Tibetan herds families. So this is when in 1968. But the Tibetan rebellion was actually still going on because he was telling me when they first went, because the Tibetan rebellion was still going on, so all the girls from the nursing school, they have to go through military training with this PLA, People's Liberation Army unit, and then halfway through they only had like a couple weeks of training. And then the rebellion activity flare up. So the PLA units that were training with was sent away, and so one night they were camping out, just these bunch of girls and one PLA officer with them. They heard a gunshot, and they rush out to their tent to see what's going on. So there was a Tibetan herdsman who came with a bunch of yaks, and there's a couple women sitting on the yaks. And he was haggling with the PLA officer. He said, I heard you have a lot of women here. We can do a trade. I brought 2 women. We can trade. So the PLA officer explained to him, no, we don't do that here. But he's like, okay. He's like, okay, you're haggling price. I understand. How about 2 for 1? I give you 2 for 1. It's good for you. 2 for 1. So there were a lot of stories like that, and like my
the scamming that we spoke about.
so my mom, like in her youth, she was pretty, right? So she was recruited to do like in the performance troupe. They will put up performance for the locals, and one day the locals, after her performance, the next day the locals. Her local acquaintance came to her and said, "Oh, you were great last night. The rebels came down from the mountain last night to see your performance." So my mom stayed there for like 15 years, and she still remember in the early 70s. I think that coincided when Nixon visited China in the early 70s. As part of the deal, when Nixon went to China, was cut off CIA funding to the Tibetan rebels. So my mom remember in the early 70s, the Tibetan rebels were coming out of the mountains to reconciliate with the local government. Like they hold reconciliation ceremony and all that. So my mom was there all those time. Yeah. So there's a lot of history, a lot of stories.
We haven't even touched on Xinjiang, and we have spoken about Xinjiang quite a lot in the past. So I guess just because it's also an autonomous region, just very briefly, today it's part of China, but it still has its own way of life.
Well, yeah. I mean, Xinjiang is always, it's basically a part of Central Asia. In terms of ethnicity, culture is closely related to the rest of the Central Asia, all the former Soviet republics, basically. But it became part of China again during the imperial times, during imperial dynasties, including during the first Opium War. Xinjiang was already part of China back in 1840s, and it remained part of China. And then from 1911 to 1940s, or the period after overthrow of Chinese dynasties and World War II, Xinjiang was ruled by various warlords, and to maintain control, and there was a lot of fighting in Xinjiang actually becomes between these different warlords factions. And then in the 1930s, there was a Uyghur revolt against the Chinese warlords of Xinjiang at that time, Jin Suzhen, because Jin Suzhen at that time was trying to take away the Uyghur land and give them to invite like Chinese famine refugees from other provinces to settle those lands. So that led to the most recent Uyghur rebellion in 1930s. But it got squashed by the other Chinese warlords' army that was coming through. And then so from 1930s to 1940s, Xinjiang was basically a Soviet protectorate, because the Xinjiang warlord Sen Sicai was only able to maintain control over this large area with Soviet support, with Stalin support. But during the World War II, when he saw that the Nazi Germany's army was at the gate of Moscow, he saw, oh, Soviet Union is finished. And this was also around the time when Japan did the Pearl Harbor attack against the United States. Everyone in China knew that Japan is finished. There's no way Japan can win against U.S. And Chiang Kai-shek became a U.S. ally. And so Sen Sicai thought, okay, Stalin is finished, but Chiang Kai-shek is getting the American support, so he's a sure bet. So Sen Sicai then expelled all the Soviet advisors, the Soviet Red Army from Xinjiang, and he switched allegiance to Chiang Kai-shek. And Stalin didn't like that. And then in 1946, after the war wrapped up in Europe, Stalin, Soviet Union, then they supported a bunch of Uyghur and Kazakh communists to come from Central Asia into Xinjiang to start the so-called Second East Turkestan Republic. The first East Turkestan Republic was the one that was created in the 1930s that only existed for 6 months. So the Second East Turkestan Republic was established in the northern part of Xinjiang. The part of Xinjiang we haven't been to on our trip. We've been to the southern Xinjiang because Xinjiang is such a huge place. So in the northern part of Xinjiang, they established the Second East Turkestan Republic. It was a coalition formed by communists and the Islamists. So it's a very unstable coalition. And but the KMT, Chiang Kai-shek didn't like that. He sent his own army into Xinjiang, and the two sides clashed. And eventually, as part of negotiation between Chiang Kai-shek's KMT government, nationalist government, and the Soviet Union, Stalin agreed to have those people in the East Turkestan Republic to take away the name East Turkestan Republic, to call themselves a revolutionary three district of Xinjiang, and to have them form a coalition provincial government in Xinjiang with Chiang Kai-shek's people. So that was the situation in Xinjiang before the Chinese Civil War. And then when the communists won the Chinese Civil War, the former East Turkestan Republic people, who are a bunch of communists, because the communists they purged the Islamists soon afterwards. The Islamists and the communists, they didn't get along, so the communists managed to purge the Islamists, and they control the 3 districts of northern Xinjiang. So they make contact with the Chinese communists. They say, okay, let's go after the Chiang Kai-shek's army together. And then the Chiang Kai-shek's garrison surrendered in Xinjiang, in Urumqi. And so all of Xinjiang become the People's Republic of China. So this is a kind of brief history of Xinjiang. It has always been part of China, but there was only 2 instances of like attempt at creating a breakaway republic, but they didn't last long. And it wasn't like an occupation in 1949. It was literally the communists, the Uyghur and Kazakh communists, and the other Chinese communists got together, and they gang up on the Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist army and the Islamist faction. So that's a history of Xinjiang in a nutshell.
It's also in Xinjiang where you and I encountered the Tajiks, my people.
Yeah, so for the audience who are confused, there were still a lot of police checkpoints in Xinjiang, especially around the border. But we were really confused because Pepe Escobar and our Russian photographer were sitting in the other car. They always get pulled over and have their passport checked. And here, me and Jerm sitting together, we just get waved through. So we're like, what's going on here? And then we're like, okay, they thought Jerm was a Tajik. They must think you are like a local.
I'm safe with my people, Cole. My people need me.
Yeah, I think Pepe could have. Pepe probably could get away, but Stan was just too blonde and too blue-eyed too fast.
So my question right at the very beginning of our conversation: is China expansionist?
No, China is not. Okay, so all the when People's Republic of China was founded in 1949, it inherited the border problem, from the colonial times with all its neighbors. But right now, China has resolved all its land borders with all its neighbors except 2 countries, India and Bhutan. And Bhutan's foreign policy is controlled by India. So India is really the odd one out. But China has settled its border with Russia in the north, settled its border with Mongolia, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Myanmar, Laos, Vietnam, even Vietnam. Land border between China and the dispute between China and Vietnam right now is strictly maritime dispute in South China Sea. But the land border has been settled since the early 2000s. So all the land border has been settled. So it does show that China's willingness to negotiate. And even on the South China Sea issue, like that claim predates communist. The Chinese claim on South China Sea actually, the people talk about 9-dash line. Well, it used to be 11-dash line. It was proposed by Chiang Kai-shek's government, right after World War II. But anyway, go ahead. You were shaking.
However, that you're only speaking about physical expansion. A very popular trope is the idea that China is trying to expand digitally or through what trade colonialism or whatever.
I mean, okay. I mean, if you then is Facebook American expansion of, and you can call Facebook American expansion of the mind. Oh, by the way, you can ban TikTok. It's possible. India banned TikTok. America, they forced the sale of TikTok to Oracle. So these governments do have control.
But hold on. I said trade. So Africa is a good example. They say, well, the Chinese are trying to expand and take over Africa. I mean, I've got a Chinese car, for example.
Yeah, you are monitored. I'm getting daily feed from your car cameras, and I talk with Xi Jinping every Thursday, to talk about your Jermy's daily routines. But anyway, it's called trade. I mean, trade is literally between two people, like two consenting parties. Like China is not coming to Africa holding a gun to anybody's head, say sign this deal, or else.
No, but
or else.
Sorry, but I'm interrupting again because this is a fairly loaded argument that constantly gets made. So, for example, Addis Ababa, right, the huge airport that was built by the Chinese. They argue that these are debt traps, which then helps China get control.
Okay. Yeah, what did China do? Did China take physical control of the Addis Ababa airport? Did China send the People's Liberation Army soldier to secure that airport? I mean, did China send any aircraft carrier attack groups to Africa? Like, United States actually have U.S. actually have military bases in almost every African country. They have this called lily pad strategy, whereas China just announced zero tariff for African goods for almost entire African continent. I say almost because the Swaziland.
Yeah, that's part of South Africa, Swaziland. Yes, it's a monarchy.
Wait, Swaziland is part of South Africa?
Yeah, did you not know that?
Oh, no, I was thinking it's Swati. So that's the only exception because that country recognizes Taiwan. So it does not have diplomatic relation. So for all the African countries, so all 53 that have diplomatic relations with China, China has granted zero tariff for African goods. So they, I mean, if you call that colonialism, I don't know. I mean, this is like calling everybody Nazis that you don't agree with. It's like, he makes the term meaningless. Go ahead.
No, so the argument, Carl, is that, and this is how I understand the argument. I'm not entirely certain if I see evidence of it, but this is nonetheless the argument I hear all the time.
Sure.
And that is, the Chinese will come in and build infrastructure, but the African countries are not able to pay it back. So what happens as a result is that policy, therefore, gets influenced in favor of China.
What happened? I mean, then what happened? Like what did people need to give me a concrete example? How did Chinese loans or Chinese built railroad, force Africans to? Yeah,
I don't know.
Like
I mean,
right now, I hear a lot of I hear the same argument, but again, it's like almost all conjectures. Like this could happen, but okay, how? Like, give me an example. Like this is why I tell people, give me an example where China actually come in, either physically possess an asset. Go ahead.
Let me jump onto a high-speed train built by the Chinese, and then think about it, and I'll come back to you.
Okay, for sure.
Because that's what they're doing. The Chinese are building infrastructure. I don't necessarily see a problem with infrastructure. I certainly see it as better than, say, American threats of invasion, war, sanctions. And I certainly see Chinese, quote unquote, debt as better than debt from the IMF or the World Bank, for example.
Well, that's actually why there's a Chinese debt myth being propagated. Actually, by the way, the originator of a Chinese myth is an Indian think tank. He was an Indian think tank, and he was adopted by all the Western journalism, mainstream journalism. And the thing is, for decades, IMF and World Bank, that's the only game in town. And now they have competition. They have China come in to offer the loan. So Africans, they have additional choice. They have an alternative. They can decide, okay, whether I'm going to take the IMF loan, World Bank loan, or the Chinese loans. I mean, I think more choice is better.
I think so too. And I mean, also, I prefer paying less for Chinese products if it's just as good. I mean, my car, which is Chinese, basically costs a third of the price of the equivalent, let's say, Japanese or German. And Someone says to me, yes, but it's Chinese. How long is it going to last? Well, I've got a 7-year maintenance plan, full maintenance plan. So it's going to last at least 7 years.
That's actually the reason why I bought my Chinese car, because he has a 10-year warranty on the battery. And so that's pretty good. That's pretty good for me. Because I got
I've got a warranty.
car.
Yeah, yours is EV. Mine's petrol, but
Yeah.
I've got a warranty on my engine for 1 million kilometers.
Yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. I got 10-year. I got 10-year warranty. I mean, I only have, my car only have an electric motor, so the battery and motor is warranty for 10 years. That's good enough for me.
Yeah,
because 10 years, hopefully, I'll be out trading for another car. But yeah,
the conclusion here is you're arguing that China is not expansionist, and we won't get into a whole discussion, but it's obvious that the United States is.
well,
in
I mean,
contrast.
the simplest thing, just look at the recent history. The last time China fought a war was 1979 against Vietnam, right? So now we're in 2026, which it's almost like, so for the last 40 years, China has not fought a war, whereas United States have been fighting war every decade,
And Trump himself even said that he's not going to start any new wars. It's a good thing he kept his promise.
The thing is, every American president, came to office, promised to be the peace president. I remember, as far as I remember, because the first time I'm eligible to participate in U.S. election was the George W. Al Gore election. And back then, George W. Bush promised that he will pursue a non-interventionist foreign policy. I mean, this is every American president. Like Obama, he came to office promising, don't do stupid shit. He just, I guess the smart thing to do is join weddings and funerals,
Trump is still your president.
He's still my president. Yeah, he's still he's still my best president for accelerationism of American imperial decline. I mean, like, what the heck is he doing, man? Now they're saying they're gonna start a ground war with Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which was open before he started the war. It's a disaster, man. I'm lucky. I'm like, the U.S. Pentagon just announced a plan. They're gonna increase the maximum age for enlisting to 42. So I'm lucky. I'm already 49. I'm gonna be 50 this year. So so I think by the time they need to increase the age to 50, U.S. is screwed anyway. Don't worry about it.
All right, Carl.
Yeah.
How can I follow your work?
Yeah, I am a prolific ship poster on X. So, just follow my name, Carl Za. That's my handle on X. I also have a YouTube channel. Again, Carl Za, just my name. And I do host a audio podcast on Patreon, Silk and Steel Podcast, where I focus more on the Chinese history. I delve into the Chinese. I do a chronological telling of the Chinese history from the very beginning. And my aim is to reach the present day sometime in the future, because right now I'm around 238 BC. So I still have a couple thousand years to go. So if that's your cup of tea, check it out. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course you have a show on UK Column.
UK columns, yes. UK column. I have a show regular 3 times a week.
Thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Thank you, Jerms.